Introducing, I have a name for you, Fusion. Fusion is the library that I will be introducing to you today. It is a new JavaScript and Laravel library. And I know you're thinking, Aaron, we have a first-party JavaScript and Laravel library called Inertia. No longer third-party, first-party, yes. Fusion does not abolish Inertia, it fulfills Inertia. So this is my vision for what if we took Inertia way too far? What if we just took it like 5 steps beyond what is reasonable? That is Fusion.
So Aaron, what a perfect intro. Like, I'm just curious, like, why, like, where did this come from? Like, you were just like, hey, Inertia's fine, Livewire's good, but yeah, I've got 14 products, 4 kids, 7 podcasts, but I really want to make this new thing and spend my life creating this app or this project.
That's a great question. That is a great question. So it came from, my co-founder, Steve, he's a JavaScript guy, like through and through. He's a Vue guy, so he does fit in well in the Laravel community because we love Vue.js. And he has picked up Nuxt and really likes Nuxt, and that's like their, meta framework. Whatever a meta framework actually is, that's what their meta framework is. And so Steve and I are working together on all these projects. We're building out the course platform. We're building out all this stuff. We're using Inertia because he's like, hey, I'm super fast with Vue. Livewire seems cool, but like I'm a Vue guy. I've never really written PHP in my life. And I'm like, that's great. We have Inertia. We're so lucky in this community to have these 2 super viable front-end-esque options. So we'll use Inertia and Vue and Laravel. It'll be totally fine. So we're working on it, and Steve is constantly like, hey, how do I get data into this Vue template? And I'm like, oh, well, you define a route, and then you define what your props are, and then you send them down, and then on the front end, you got to define your props, and then you can receive them. And he's like, what? Why am I doing all this crap? And then, his next question is like, okay, how do I mark that a user has finished a video? So like, we're listening to these video events and we want to fire off like video's done, like mark it so that the UI changes. And I'm like, no problem. You got to create a route. You got to create a handler on the back end. You got to create a controller. You got to write your own fetch function or Axios call. And he's like, this is not the way that it should be. And so it's one of those things where it's like you don't really know the filth and the squalor that you're living in until your friend comes over and they're like, dude, you've got to clean this place up. And that's kind of how I felt. Was Steve kept saying stuff like, this should be easier. And I looked at it with fresh eyes and was like, this should be easier. What are we doing here? And I had observed from the outside the Next.js community with all of their React server components, React server actions, all of this stuff that I don't fully know. And I'm like, that is kind of nice that you can kind of compose across the network boundary. What would that look like in Laravel and Vue? And that's kind of the genesis of it all.
That's awesome. So I have never used Inertia ever.
Wow.
I used Backbone.js way back in the day, and I hated it with Marionette, and then and then we used like one of the really, really first like versions of Vue, and then that was it. I switched to basically not doing anything. Switched to Livewire, and then I worked at with Ian on HelpSpot, which is kind of, it was kind of old JavaScript like jQuery and the stuff before that, and then. For me, like Livewire come around, and I'm like, oh, this is like life-changing. I don't ever want to go back to JavaScript land.
Totally.
So I guess my first question to you is like, if you're coming, you're a brand new developer, you've never used Inertia, is it still pretty easy to get started with, or do you still need to kind of know sort of Vue or React or anything else, JavaScript land?
Yeah, so this is kind of my vision for this is like, pulling in JavaScript developers. So there's like a certain subset of people that will never use JavaScript on the front end. That's fine. Like I'm not going to ever try to convince them to do that. And for those people, we have a great, first and a half party offering with Livewire, which I think people should continue to use. What I am going after, and what I think Fusion goes after, is the people that really, really, really want to use a Vue or React front end. and are finding themselves ending up on the back end of those stacks and realizing, well, shoot, there's a lot more to do than just like the front end and then get over the network. And once you get over the network, what happens next? How do I talk to my database? How do I send an email? And it's like, hey, we actually have an answer for that. And so if you're going to use Fusion, you absolutely need to know how to use one of these front end frameworks. I do think that this lowers the bar in terms of like what you need to know about front end, because it does rely pretty heavily on inertia. So you don't have to figure out like client side routing and all of this like state stuff. You're like actually going to new pages. And so a lot of state related issues go away. And the goal is to make it approachable to people who are coming from the JavaScript community and want to start learning a little bit more about Laravel / a little bit more about like backend development.
Yeah. So coming from like a front end developer, what does a front end developer typically use on the back end? Is it just all sort of Node on the back end, and so they've never had any experience with, I guess, Laravel or Rails or anything?
Yeah, I think that is the meaty middle of the market. Is people will pick up React and then quickly pick up Next.js, and I'm not terribly familiar with Next.js, but I do understand parts of it. Or they'll pick up Remix, which is the one that got bought by Shopify. Kent C. Dodds talks about Remix a lot. And those have really focused on starting at the front end and working their way back in terms of like the framework development, where Laravel obviously started on the back end and now has a fully fleshed out front end story. They are taking it the opposite direction. I think Remix explicitly claims to be a center stack framework. I've heard them say that a lot. These meta frameworks will also claim to be full stack quite often. And I think it's led to a little bit of confusion when you say Laravel's full stack and Next.js is full stack. And so I think we've seen a lot of the discussion about Laravel go to batteries included, because Laravel has all of these things, like, for goodness sakes, authentication. Like, you can log in. And Next.js is like, you could use any one of these 5 different SaaS tools for your auth layer. And it's like, well, that's not really batteries included. Like, yes, you can run code on the back end, but where are all the components? Where's my queue driver? Where's my email? Where's my auth? Where's my everything else? And so I think what a lot of Next.js developers have found, the position they have found themselves in, is super solid on the front with React and everything. You cross over that network barrier, you get to the back end, and then you're in you're in Jazz. It's just like, let's just make it up as we go. Grab this package, grab this ORM package, and try to get them all to work together. And JavaScript developers claim, and I have no reason to doubt them, that they love that. They just love the freedom and flexibility of like, I'm going to build my own stack. That sounds exhausting to me. And so I am hoping, and I think it is true, that there's a subset of JavaScript developers that will cross over that network gap and then be like, there's nothing here. I just want something here. And that's where Fusion can come into play. Because once you cross over, you have the entire power of Laravel on the back.
Yeah, that's it's so much reminding me about like Vim versus PHP Storm,
yes,
totally. Linux versus a Mac. It's just like, I'm the same way. I don't want to mess with none of that. I just want to build an app and hopefully make money or publish it or do something.
Yes, exactly. Yes. Yeah. The people that fiddle with their NeoVim configs for like hours on stream, I look at them and I think, I'm glad you're happy. I do not want to do that. Right. I never, ever, ever, ever want to do that. And that's just because we have different goals. Like, I want to build something and publish it and hopefully make money. And then, in your case, go play golf. Right. But like, I don't want to fiddle. I want to make. And so this is my perspective on everything, is like, this, i.e. Fusion, will appeal to some people and it won't appeal to a lot of people. And I'm totally okay with that. I'm just building it for the people that like kind of operate like I do.
Yeah. Are you mentally prepared for any backlash on Hacker News and everywhere else?
Boy, the backlash on Reddit was swift and severe. The Vue.js subreddit did not appreciate it. Even the Laravel subreddit was like, this makes no sense. Why are we going back to 2004? And it was totally fine. I mean, I think a lot of those comments betrayed the fact that they didn't watch the video, which makes sense. Or they watched it and didn't understand what was happening. I think many people thought we are going back to like a PHP being the templating language for your front end, and we're like mixing in Vue somehow, which is it's just not the case. Like, you happen to be writing PHP in a Vue file, but in the build process, we extract it and we basically turn it into a controller. So it's just kind of like syntactic sugar over controllers and routes and views, and you can just write it all in one place. And we'll do a little bit of auto wiring to get that state into your Vue template, but it's not fundamentally the same as like PHP in 2004. But boy, did they hate it. And it was nice. I felt like, actually, this doesn't affect me at all. I'm somewhat a sensitive guy, and I normally am like, feedback is sometimes difficult. And this, I looked at it and I was like, don't care, totally fine. So that was, it was fine. I didn't care.
That's great. And this brings up another question. Which I know this is kind of brand new, and you're probably the only one that's actually using it right now. Mm-hmm. How are you going to, like, the best way to structure functions, inside the Vue file? Like, what happens when it gets just a bunch of stuff? Right. Do you have any solutions there, or have you given any thoughts to that? Or
yeah, I have. And that was one of the criticisms that came up on Reddit that I thought was well-founded. It's like, this is going to lead to massive files. And I'm sensitive to that. And I think my principle on that is that this the block of PHP that you write in your Vue file is basically a controller, more or less. It like defines what comes down and defines what can be received back from the front end. And so my opinion on this is that the controller should be relatively thin. And so if we have, the concept of publishing a podcast, and you got to call out to Transistor, and you got to do some FFmpeg, and you got to do some whatever, I think that should be wrapped up in some sort of action. So like publish podcast action. And in your PHP that you're writing in Fusion, you're just basically receiving input from the front end and then handing it off to that action to do all of like the hard work that requires the container and all of the other stuff. And it basically ends up being a way to route from the HTTP layer into the rest of your application. And so I think that's probably going to be the blessed path, which is like, hey, y'all, don't do everything in this one, like in the same way that you wouldn't do everything in a controller, don't do everything in your Fusion component here. And I think that most people will get that. Of course, people will write 700 lines of PHP in a Fusion component, and it's going to be like, this is not ideal, but I think it'll settle out pretty nicely.
True. And I mean, I was just thinking about this while you were talking about that. One of the examples you showed was like class-based PHP in the file. So in theory, if you do have 1,000 lines of PHP there, you could, if PHP Storm or whatever has autocomplete, you can jump between your methods, and
for sure,
it might not be too bad.
Yeah, totally.
But yeah, totally agree. Thin controllers, get that stuff away from all your files.
Yeah, and all of the Fusion stuff is resolved out of the container, so like all the method calls. And so like if you want to inject, process podcast as a class, you can totally do that. And so I've tried to make it such that it's basically Laravel. It's basically a Laravel controller, but with a little bit of extra magic on top. And so hopefully that's where people will land on it.
Gotcha. The next question I have is, what about testing? Like, are you going to be able to use pest in PHP unit, or can you somehow test the compiled file? I don't know how that's going to work. Or do you have thoughts on that already?
Yeah, no, I have a lot of thoughts. So as it is being built, so like one of the great advantages I have over traditional PHP is I am guaranteed that there's going to be a build step, because if you're using Vue or React, you have to have a build step. And so I hook into that build step to do all of the Fusion stuff. And at the end of the build step, what you end up with is a bunch of PHP classes, existing on your disk. And so from that perspective, testing is the exact same as it would be otherwise, provided you run your build step before you run your tests. And so that's a little bit different, and there are some like niceties that I can add around that to ensure that the build step has been run before you run like a Fusion test or something like that. But then at the end, you can just hit an endpoint and assert that you get the right response back, and it becomes basically like testing an inertia app. So if you want to test the backend, you can hit the route and it will give you the stuff, and you can assert about JSON and stuff like that. And I can add some macros and stuff to make that easier. And then if you want to test the front end, it's the same as testing any JavaScript heavy front end. You gotta pick some tool that presumably opens it in the browser and exercises it there.
Gotcha. Yeah, I just find that interesting because, like, it to me, it sort of comes back to like even like Pest or PHP, in just a standard straight Laravel app with no JavaScript. A lot of times you'll want to, reseed the database or, dump the database before you even start your test. So it's kind of the same vibes, I guess.
Yep, totally. And the stuff that gets written to disk contains no data, so it's not like we're doing something at build time that is, dependent on local state and then you ship it and it's wrong. So it's like we're basically just taking your PHP code, mucking around with it a little bit and turning it into a controller. And so that really simplifies the rest of how do I deploy to production? How do I test? The fact that we're doing this weird thing and turning it into a normal thing. And then you can just test the normal thing, which is quite nice.
Nice. And I assume it's going to work fine on Laravel Cloud and pretty much anywhere, right?
Yep, totally.
Nice. And all right, so from your original talk, you said on the roadmap you had React. Is that going to be ready for launch?
No, not for Friday. No, definitely not. Definitely not. No, it's I already have. So there's a Slack group that I started that has like basically open source sponsors. You can come join the Slack group, and you might remember Miguel Pierferdier. I forget his last name. Purple hair. Yeah. One time almost bought the Constitution. That guy. He's very good at React. And there's another guy in there called Nick who's also very good at React. And they're already scheming about like how do we do this in React. And so, I was supposed to release it on Monday. Got out over my skis as I'm wont to do. And didn't, but then I added everybody in the Backstage group. I added them to the repo because I was like, hey, y'all, I messed up. I can't release it today. Let me just add you to the repo and you can poke around. And so they've already been in there, poking around and trying to figure out like, ooh, the more React way to do it would be this way. What do you think about this? And I'm like, that seems cool. Like, keep going. So React will come soon, but it won't be like in the next week or two.
Gotcha. All right, so next, security. I assume it would be secure by default, or is it going to open up to, if people that don't know what they're doing, is it possible to get hacked using this?
So I'll just say no, and then I'll go into more full answers. But if anybody clips it, no, not possible. So I think the two vectors that would expose something is returning data over the wire that you didn't mean to return. And what is going to happen there is, like, let's say you return a model, right? So you return a model. It's going to run through Laravel's typical model to array thing. And so anything that, I think Laravel has appends, hidden, and then you can just completely change the to array. So that's the same as any regular Laravel response or any inertia passing down of props. Whatever you send over the wire is going to go over the wire. So you could use an API resource, like a resource, and wrap up your models in resources or something like that. But there's no safety for what you decide to return to the front end. I don't think that's going to be too much of a problem. I mean, I guess if you return the user, I think actually password is in the hidden field by default. Of course, it's bcrypted, but I think in Laravel's default model, it's hidden, so you don't even get the encrypted password out. or the hashed rather. So that should be fine. The other vector that it exposes is it provides basically ingress points into your application, right? So you say like, hey, I'm going to write this Fusion component, and here are the methods that I want to expose to the front end: favorite, unfavorite, listen later, whatever in the podcast sense. All of those become addressable by HTTP. So you can, if you were clever, you could watch when you hit the favorite button, you could watch the network and see how we're sending back like, hey, target the favorite method, and you could try to hit a different method. Now, when that request comes in, Fusion will look and see like what method are they trying to hit, and then we will reconfirm that that method is supposed to be exposed, right? And so as we're doing the build, we're introspecting your PHP and figuring out what are all the exposed methods, and then we write those into the bundle so that Vue knows like, hey, here's the list of exposed methods you can use. Of course, somebody could just change that, and so we on the back end reconfirm, all right, they're trying to hit the favorite method. Let's go look up that class on disk and see if favorite is a publicly exposed method. If it's not, we'll just throw a 404 because it's like, well, is it here? Is it not? Who knows? But you can't touch it. So I think those are the two vectors that could be insecure, and I think they're pretty safe. But of course, if you find out that that is not true, Aaron at Tryhard Studios, I would love to receive your email.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I always think of like people, new developers opening up themselves to security issues when they don't think about it. And, you know, you're just like, you just assume everything's fine. And you're like, oh yeah, well, I guess I really shouldn't have like exposed everybody's email addresses on this page or something.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's one that's like, that's one area that is slightly different than what I understand Livewire to be, is that we're like, once we hand over the data to the front end, you basically never have to hand us that data back. And so we're not like, we're not worried about the data on the front end being tinkered with and then handed back to the back end to do something nefarious with. We are more in, because we don't reinstantiate state from like the front end really. We're more like a traditional request response. You're going to post to the back end and we'll do some stuff. So that's kind of, I'm thinking where the lines will be drawn, but yeah, I definitely want to try to avoid foot guns as much as possible.
Gotcha. All right. Next on my list, something else you mentioned, maybe coming. Actions per component. Interesting. So here's the setup right now is that you can have a PHP block in your page. Like in inertia parlance, like you have a page and that like maps to a URL, and then inside of that page you've got dozens of other Vue components or whatever. Right now you can write PHP at the page level, and so that would be like podcasts / index or something, but you cannot write PHP at the component level, which would be like podcast row.view or something like that. And I think it would be nice to be able to do that. So right now what you would have to do is emit events to the page level and then call, do your HTTP call there, which is a totally normal thing to do. Events up, props down, very normal. But I think it would be fun and potentially very powerful to have each Vue component be able to define basically an API route or two that you could do stuff with at the component level. And I think that would simplify some of this like cross-component communication, which always gets super hairy in any language, in any framework. It's like, how do I speak to my parent component and my sibling components? It's like, oh, this kind of sucks. You have to write an event bus or something. So I think that is one that could be really powerful. I don't know that state will come down into the component level, because I'm not entirely sure how that would even work, but I do think having like API endpoints for your individual components would be kind of awesome. Yeah. Which I know this is version 1. I assume once you actually publish it, people are going to come to you with both pull requests and tons of ideas that you probably didn't even think about. Keep you busy for a while. Mm-hmm. All right, so tooling is my last one on my list. Yep. What's missing, I guess, tooling wise? Just sort of the IDEs or more?
Yeah, so there's a little bit of IDE love that needs to happen. So right now you open, podcast.vue, and you can write a PHP block. You can just say PHP, opening tag is PHP, closing tag is PHP, just like an XML tag, not like the one we're used to as PHP developers. And in PHP Storm, you can configure what is called a language injection. And so you can tell PHP Storm, hey, anytime you see this XML tag, which is just PHP, inject the PHP language. That gives you syntax highlighting. That gives you a little bit of a little bit of help. What it doesn't know is it doesn't know that you are in the context of a Laravel application. And so it doesn't look at your composer.json, your class map autoloader. It doesn't look at any of that. And so you're still kind of in the wild, wild west in terms of I want to, use the auth facade. It's not going to say hey, let me just auto import that for you. It's like, oh, shoot, I got to, do that manually. Fortunately, Taylor put me in touch with somebody at JetBrains, and they are bouncing around internally. There's 4 or 5 people on the email now, trying to figure out who's the right person to talk to about making PHP Storm aware that this is not just injected PHP. It's full application PHP. Go look at the autoloader, figure out what classes exist. So I am hopeful that will be coming soon. Fortunately, it's not it's a new language or anything. It's not I've invented new syntax. It's just the exact same language in a different place that we're not used to. So I'm hoping that there's some little code path inside of that, JetBrains Java monstrosity that they can just be yeah, that's real PHP. In terms of VS Code, not something I use, so I don't really know. Miguel, again, has already figured out how to do tagged template literal, which is a JavaScript thing, and tag it with PHP, and then it will inject PHP highlighting into there. But I imagine, obviously, VS Code is much more open source than JetBrains is, and so I imagine people will figure that part out pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think I did see a tweet actually. Speaking of JetBrains, of the Laravel idea. The guy that creates the Laravel idea package, saying he was going to add support for it.
Yeah, so he said something it looks like I got work to do. And I was like, oh, cool. Thanks, guy. I'm a paying Laravel idea subscribers. Thank you. I don't know who it is, but thank you for all your work. It's incredible.
Yes, yeah. I think that's a must have
totally.
For me on PHP Storm.
Yes.
You got to have that.
Yeah.
I think that's all my questions on this Fusion. So what did I miss? Anything else you want to talk about for their launch, or anything that I may have missed?
No, I don't think so. I will go back again to what is the goal, what is the vision, and the vision is to pull people into the Laravel ecosystem. So that is my hope, is that we can continue to be a port in the storm for people who are boy, web development has gotten complicated. My hope is that people will put down their PHP preconceived notions, come over to our side, realize that, hey, we've got basically everything you would ever need to build a full, honest-to-goodness SaaS application. And hopefully, Fusion can help lower the bar to get some of those very, very intelligent, very productive people over and have them use what I think is a better backend. That is my hope.
Agreed. I love how Laravel is pushing the bar forward. From the old days. I know you're a young man compared to me, but in my days, every framework only stuck with what they it was only PHP. You did not branch out into CSS or any of these things. And I like how we've, as a community, we've sort of embraced this, that it's not just PHP. We're having a full stack here. We need to be able to support everything. So I think it's awesome, and I really like where the future's headed for Laravel and with that mindset.
Thanks to our pragmatic, benevolent dictator Taylor for leading the charge on that.
Exactly. All right. Well, Aaron, I want to thank you again for
of course.
taking a few minutes here to talk about Fusion, and good luck on the release, and we will do our best to get the word out for you.
Thanks. Also, if this podcast releases on Friday when Fusion releases and you're listening to it, today is my birthday. Not today, but when you're listening to it, today, Friday, is my birthday. So please tell me happy birthday.
Yes, happy birthday, and thank you for everything you do for the community and for what you're building, and just for being a good human in our ecosystem. So
No,
we
you're too
appreciate
kind.
you.
Thank you. That's very nice. It's always a joy to be here. I look forward to the release. Hopefully, it goes well.